welcome to Chapter 4 of my puppy raising series. This one is going to lead us a little further from the actual puppies and into the murky waters of finances, society, and colonialism. It's been sparked by my puppy raising and placing, so it'll be part of this series as well. The episode I had planned for today was going to be a conversation with someone who has dedicated their life to genetics and domesticated animals, how to keep populations healthy, and also the question of companion animals, where they come from and how we breed them. We recorded that conversation. It was intriguing and thought-provoking for both of us. Before I release an episode, I send it to my guests to listen to. They can then decide whether they would like me to cut something out, add something in, or make any other changes. This time, the person I've been talking to, let's call them Tony, because that is their name. No, it isn't, just joking. Anyways, Tony and their advisor concluded that we couldn't release the episode at all because it was way too provocative and would make many people very mad. If we cut out everything that was provocative, there would be hardly anything left. I also usually give people the option to leave things they'd rather not say in public in the episode, but bleep out their name and modify their voice so they are unrecognizable. Tony did not want to take that risk. This culture of fear of speaking your truth that we live in and of itself warrants a separate episode that I hope I'll get to in the future. In any case, so instead of my conversation with Tony, you'll hear my own reflections after the conversation. Also, let's give Tony a bit of a backstory because it's kind of unfun not to be able to picture who we're talking about and who has inspired some of my thoughts here. Tony is a scientist. They live in a cabin on Seahorse Shoelace Island with 3 Gulplets and their girlfriend. Like most of the world, Seahorse Shoelace, in case you're not familiar with it due to its remoteness and small size, used to be a European colony. The name comes from the first European colonizers' so-called craft of making shoelaces out of the seahorses that used to populate the waters around the island. There are no more seahorses of the shoelace subspecies left in the wild today, as has happened with many species all around the world once we Europeans set foot in their habitats. Tony's research has been published in various journals about livestock breeding and pet populations with closed stud books. They are the founder of an organization that looks for proactive approaches to dealing with a small gene pool of different breeds of Gulplets. Speaking of Gulplets, Gulplets are a popular pet on Seahorse Shoelace Island because they are cute, trainable, easy to housebreak, and claimed to be hyperallergenic. The first Gulplet pedigrees started cropping up in the 1800s, quite a long time after the Gulplet's self-domestication. Their now extinct wild ancestors would scavenge at human trash sites, and slowly their flight distance went down. People started taming the ones with the smallest flight distances and soon began keeping them as indoor-outdoor pets. The Gulplet is a warm-blooded animal in the clade of ornithorans. Its English name derives from its love for gulping down smoothies made of freshly grown toaster ovens. The original indigenous name has been lost. Wild Gulplets used to be the color of North American bunnies. Starting in the 1800s, the Seahorse Shoelace Islanders started keeping records, and only a few decades later, they had developed a large variety of colors, patterns, and code structures. Today, there are breeds, such as the popular polka-dotted short-haired mini Gulplet. Allowed colors, according to the GAA, the Gulplet Appreciation Association, are only light on dark ground. So that means while you can have a polka-dotted short-haired mini Gulplet with yellow dots on an olive-green backdrop coat, you can't have a polka-dotter that's the color of a Dalmatian. That's because Dalmatians are dark on a light background, and the breed standard is very clear about the rules. Up until the 19th century, polka-dotters who fell outside the breed standard used to be culled. Later, they were typically given away for free after being spayed or neutered. By today, inbreeding and closed stud books have ensured that we don't get any dark-on-light polka-dotter freshlets in the first place. The mini polka-dotters may not be crossed with the medium polka-dotters and the great polka-dotters. Their standards, while essentially the same in terms of behavior and colors, are different only in terms of weight and size. The polka-dotter is just one example of over 300 recognized Gulplet breeds existing on Seahorse Shoelace Island today. Some are very popular, such as the medium-sized berry fluff, who comes in all the colors of the world's berries. It is said to be naturally easygoing and good with children, doesn't shed and baroos very little. Other Gulplet breeds, in case you wondered, baroo loudly in the early hours of the morning and are not recommended for apartment living. When a play starring a medium-sized berry fluff hit the theaters of Seahorse Shoelace Island in 1921, this particular breed became so sought after that an entire industry developed around producing them. Their personality is sweet and sunny, and some of the loveliest Gulplets you will ever meet are medium berry fluffs for sure. They are considered an ideal first Gulplet as well as a great family pet. After the second medium berry fluff explosion of 1981, brought about by a movie adaptation of the original play, this particular breed saw a sad trend. Over the years, they turned into cancer factories. If you get a medium berry fluff to be your companion, you can be almost certain they're going to develop cancer at some point in their lives. It's the leading cause of death in the breed. The seahorse shoelace islanders continue breeding them though, because the demand hasn't diminished. They're such a lovely breed that people who grow up with them tend to want another one, no matter how many they have seen suffer from cancer. Even if you cross two that are as far apart as possible with the berry fluff, the least related combination of two purebreds is as related as you are to your first cousin. The Polker, Daughter, and the Berry Fluff are just examples of many Gulplet breeds facing challenging issues exacerbated by inbreeding, and they aren't even the most inbred ones. Another popular breed is the little curly Purplet, who commonly has food and medication sensitivities. That means that most of them only tolerate smoothies made from the 2015 series of Panasonic Flash Express toaster ovens. They seem to be more susceptible to side effects of particular medications than the Gulplet population as a whole as well. Breeders argue they will be just fine as long as you stick to the recommended Panasonic toaster oven smoothie diet and vaccinate and medicate as little as possible. If a little curly Purplet is sold, adhering to the breeder's regime of feeding and meds is often a requirement in the contract. One final example I'd like to give to familiarize you with what Tony is up against is the heatlet. Heatlets are large Gulplets with an above-average body temperature. They're a hairless breed of Gulplet some people love to have as snuggle companions in the cold winter nights of Seahorse Shoelace Island. Once upon a time, the heatlet was a landrace folks actually used to stay warm at night. With the development of modern heating systems, they are not needed for this purpose anymore, but people still enjoy them as an eccentricity. Heatlet lovers are divided into two camps that are prone to infighting. The working heatlet lovers, who still sleep close to their heatlet, argue that the heatlet needs a job and should continue to be used to keep the house warm. The pet heatlet lovers, on the other hand, consider it cruel to use a heatlet to keep yourself warm, since a heatlet that needs to heat a room or just the body next to them spends a lot of calories. It has been argued that working heatlets have a lower life expectancy because they have to generate a lot more heat to keep their own body temperature consistent. The counter-argument of the working heatlet lovers community tends to be that it is fulfilling for a heatlet to contribute to body warmth in this way, and since Seahorse Shoelace Island no longer allows heatlet competitions, that is, or better, used to be trials, won by the first heatlet to melt a block of ice. Leisure heating is just fine, as long as your heatlet gets regular checkups by a qualified sports rehab acupuncturist. In relation to Tony's field of expertise, however, the heatlet's problem is a different one. A shrinking gene pool and a lack of health testing has led to many heatlets struggling to keep their body temperature consistent. This can result in sudden heat or cold-related death. It is possible to test for the condition and make sure to only breed clear heatlets to clear heatlets or carriers, but never breed two carriers and to take affected heatlets out of the population overall. However, these tests are extremely expensive, driving up the cost of what is referred to as ethical heatlet breeding and ethically bred heatlet freshlets. Other Gulplet breeds of the GAA's big head group cannot give birth naturally because artificial selection liked for their heads to be extremely large, which is why many self-proclaimed ethical breeders advocate for elective C-sections, which of course also drive up the price. Alright, now you know a bit about Tony. The reason I invited them on the podcast is that ever since I bred game, I've been thinking about breeding pets and placing pets and how it is commonly done in the peculiar slice of the dog world I partially inhabit. While dogs are not Gulplets, there are many parallels. The peculiar slice of the dog world I am referring to is one that I personally partially inhabit because I teach for a US-based dog training academy that mostly appeals to white upper middle class and upper class people. I like looking at the dog world as a mirror for the world at large, and in this particular slice I see lots of capital B big issues with social justice. My student population is not representative of the population as a whole in terms of race, socioeconomic status, and gender. The breeding I see being done in this particular slice of the dog world tends to be done by upper middle class or upper class white people, and they tend to sell their puppies to other upper middle class or upper class white people, and so the circle continues. On Seahorse Shoelace Island, the human population is relatively similar to the US population. According to the latest available census data, approximately 60% self-identify as white, 20% as Hispanic and Latino, 13% as Black, 6% as Asian, 0.5% as Seahorse Shoelace Island natives, and 0.5% as multiracial. That gives us a really interesting parallel. I myself am a white person, and so is Tony. One of the first things that came up for me during this conversation was its fundamental hypocrisy. One thinks to be inclusive, but we're two white people talking to each other in an echo chamber. I want to acknowledge this here before we delve any deeper. Tony's organization aims for inclusivity for all Gulplet breeders, not only purebred Gulplet breeders, but also mixed breed ones. Another aim is to breed Gulplets that are as healthy as possible and to create a free hub of scientific information as well as a safe space to share anecdotal experiences and ask for advice about any and all things Gulplet breeding and reproduction. It's a platform for Gulplet seekers to find Gulplet breeders and for Gulplet breeders to make new connections. Some are into working Gulplets, others are trying to create healthy mixed breed pet Gulplets. In terms of the represented Gulplet breeds and mixes, Tony's organization is relatively diverse and inclusive. Tony's goal is to reach even more breeders to help people to see the pitfalls of small gene pools and potentially consider outcross programs. However, the Gulplet world has several sad parallels to the peculiar slice of the US training and breeding and puppy purchasing world that I occasionally move in. One problem with this world, the dog breeds and mixes may be all over the map, but the majority of breeders, trainers, students, competitors, and so on are white upper middle class and upper class people who drive big cars and spend more time thinking about what they should feed their dogs than the vast majority of the world's population spend on what they should feed their children. Many of them have pet insurance and take their dogs to acupuncture appointments, while a big part, maybe even the majority, of the world's human population has no access to medical services themselves. Also, side note, I may be totally using the term upper middle and upper class wrong. Maybe what I mean includes the normal middle class too. I wouldn't know. I mean those of us who can spend several $1,000s on a puppy or a Gulplet without batting an eye. Because this seems problematic to me, I asked Tony if they had found a way to make the Gulplet space more inclusive for people in general. When the Gulplet organization first started many years ago, I knew it suffered the same issues that I am seeing in the dog training and education and breeding world today. I wanted to know whether Tony had solved this in the years the organization had existed and how. Sadly, Tony hadn't found the answers I was interested in. The Gulplet world is like my peculiar slice of the dog world. It is 95% white, which is to say it isn't representative of the seahorse shoelace island population overall. While I am not a statistician, I believe this means we are looking at racial injustice. Like the peculiar slice of the dog training world I mentioned earlier, the Gulplet society is also socioeconomically homogeneous in so much that pretty much everyone is rich. To define rich, by my definition, this is anyone who has more than they need. This includes me too. I may live far from Seahorse Shoelace Island, but I am rich. I own a car in a city where cars are not a necessity, and I choose to work on Apple products. That's a rich people brand. The vast majority of people around me do not have these luxuries, which makes me not only rich by my definition, but also a gentrifier. I believe it is important to be aware of this privilege I hold and not pretend otherwise, and also to think about ways for every one of us to have enough, rather than a select group of us having more than enough and everyone else less than enough. Like pretty much everywhere in the world today, racism runs rampant on Seahorse Shoelace Island as well. Tony has been grappling with the issue that if, for example, a native Seahorse Shoelace Islander wanted to approach a Gulplet breeder of their organization, this person may not feel safe. How will they know they won't be discriminated against? It's one of the topics that have kept Tony up at night. This brought up another question for me. I'm sure it's not all that different in the peculiar slice of the dog world I sometimes inhabit. Is the layer we should focus on ensuring BIPOC folks feel safe going to white breeders or white dog trainers or other white dog-related education providers? Or should we pave the way for the dog professional population in this peculiar slice of the dog world as a whole to be more representative of the population as a whole? I personally believe the latter, because as long as we only work on the former, we keep the existing power structures in place. And in these power structures, it would be a BIPOC person going to a white person to ask them for something, a puppy, etc. There is a fundamental imbalance of power in place. Just marking some white professionals as safe does not change this. Just speaking for myself. If I wanted to see a therapist, I want them to be queer, not just pretending to be a nice ally, or, actually being a nice ally. I want them to truly get the things I'm asking for support with, and I do not believe allies would get them in the same way, even if they tried to be nice. That doesn't mean I don't want everyone to be an ally, but it means I want to be able to go to someone who is part of my community, shares at least a related way of seeing the world in political and social ways, etc. If I can't find such a therapist, I won't go to therapy at all, even if there were cis heteronormative therapists who had earned badges for being good allies. So I say, burn down the establishment and make space for something new in its place, where the current power differential doesn't exist anymore. One way of doing so is by doing away with existing structures rather than trying to simply make existing structures quote-unquote nicer. This of course raises the question, if I go back to my peculiar slice of the dog world, why is it racially and socio-economically homogenous in the first place? A lot of the members of this peculiar slice in the dog world are liberals or Democrats or left-wingers and probably share my point of view already. So why is it still this fucked up? It's not that the peculiar slice of the dog world or Tony's Gulplet community consists of quote-unquote bad people, although I'm sure some of them are, because there's jerks everywhere. But most of them are probably doing the best they know how. This is where we come back to the peculiar slice of the dog training world being a mirror or metaphor for global political and social issues at large. The structures that are in place in the colonized world at large, which is most of the world, are inherently unjust. They have been put in place by the colonizers and are an integral part of how society works today. Most tiny slices of the societal cake are reproducing these structures, just on a smaller scale. Either because it has been this way for as long as we can remember, because we consciously or unconsciously want these structures to stay in place because they do benefit the rich and privileged, and this includes us, or because we simply can't think of other ways to do things, because we haven't seen them modeled around us. For some of the slices in the societal pie chart, you need a certain amount of privilege to even be able to cross the threshold. The peculiar slice of the dog world I've been talking about, as well as Seahorse, Shoelace Island, Gulplet breeding politics are among them. It's not a welcoming world if you don't have that privilege already. If you're not upper middle or upper class already, it will be almost impossible to overcome the financial barriers to this world. Not entirely impossible, of course. There are outliers who do it, but they are not representative of what's going on, even if we champion their stories and put their pictures on a website. Also, you're more likely to overcome these barriers if you're white and able-bodied and have a friend who's already part of the in-group, etc. There are layers and layers and layers and layers of potential discrimination or advantage. Also, of course, as long as a slice of the world is overtly or covertly racist and classist, fucked up and filled with microaggressions, what's the incentive for someone who fits the profile of the person being discriminated against to even want to be a part of it? I'd suspect the incentive is pretty low overall. I'm not sure if this is true for the Gulplets, but it is certainly true for dogs. They are being bred by BIPOC communities as well, of course, just in a kind of segregated way, where there is little intermingling and information sharing between that community and the peculiar slice of the dog world. The group who gets to decide whether this is okay or not is the one that holds less power in the world at large, not the one in power. The job of the group in power is to listen and change. We could learn things from each other. I believe to get to a point of greater justice, we need to throw out old systems of injustice and get to an entirely new world, where we model new things for our children, do away with hierarchies, and build a radically different world. I used to think this was impossible. I used to think we can only affect the tiniest of changes within the existing system, which is inherently unjust. Then I read Everything for Everyone by Iman Abdelhadi and Emmy O'Brien. It's the first utopian book in decades that has given me hope that things could be different. It also convinced me that there is probably no pacifist way of getting there. And for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that, rather than feeling ambivalent about it. Radically different ways of having dogs would be to do away with breeder privilege and current screening criteria for puppy applicants. The current screening criteria will occasionally require you to own rather than rent, have a fenced yard, have at least one adult in your household who doesn't work full-time, have no other intact animals, and so on. Rehoming organizations have similar ways of gatekeeping. This entire system has to go. We need to de-upper middle class the minds of breeders. The current predominantly white upper middle class ways of keeping dogs are very specific to a certain demographic, and they are by no means better than other people's ways of keeping dogs. The brainwashing into believing they are needs to be reversed because it is coded racism. I also believe we'd have to burn all our stat books. So there are ashes of a system then, and then we see what happens. Some people will be upset, let them be upset. And then maybe there will be a new kind of system, or maybe there will be no system at all. What's the worst that can happen? It can't get much worse than it already is. I'm gonna stop today's rant right here. I've got 50 more pages of notes for this episode, but let's save them for next time or leave them up to your imagination. There are 2 more guests I have invited on the show to talk about related issues. I'm hoping to hear back from them soon, and at least one of them, if they accept, will get me out of the white people echo chamber too. Happy training, everyone. Have lots of fun with your dogs, or Gulplets for that matter. Also, if you'd like to support me in making free resources, podcasting, YouTubing, and blogging, head over to adventuredogsAnarchy.com/support. It's especially helpful if you check the box that says, make this a monthly donation, since this allows me to plan ahead and schedule less for money stuff and focus on doing trueques and making free resources instead. In other exciting news, I just added a free stuff page to my website. A lot of what I made in 2023 or before in terms of webinars and conference presentations is available there for free, as long as I own the rights to it. You will find it at adventuredogsanarchy.com/free stuff. Free stuff is one word.